Member for Bateman.
Thank you, Acting Speaker. And with your indulgence, I'm going to rely on my notes a little bit more today than I would ordinarily, because this is such an important topic and one in which I really want to be clear in my words. I want to start by talking about my experience in 2013 when I moved with my husband and family to Wyndham, a small town in the East Kimberley. As we were driving into town on that very first day, having spent several days travelling from Perth, we passed a funeral procession. It was the funeral of a 12-year-old girl who had died by suicide. At the time, it wasn't in the media. I couldn't believe that the death of a child by suicide wasn't in the national news. Later, the media would start to report these deaths, and the child to which I refer was the subject of a coronial inquest into the deaths of 13 children and young persons in the Kimberley region, Western Australia. It was in Wyndham that I decided to become a teacher, and this really accelerated my own journey of witnessing the devastating and lifelong impacts of child abuse and neglect on our children. I have to say I was somewhat reluctant to start my contribution to this debate today with the story I just shared, as I don't want to contribute to stereotypes or ideas that child abuse and harm is a unique characteristic of remote or Aboriginal communities. It is not. I went on to teach across a range of schools in different demographic and geographic locations, and sadly, child abuse exists in all communities. However, my experience in Wyndham and later in Kalgoorlie did give me a deeper understanding of the importance of embedding cultural understandings into responses of child protection. The Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander child placement principle and cultural support planning is a really important aspect of this bill. This amendment and this principle in section 12 sets out an order of priority for placing an Aboriginal child in a care or placement arrangement. The first priority is placement with a member of the child's family, followed by placement with an Aboriginal person in the child's community in accordance with local customary practice, followed then by placement with an Aboriginal person who may be anywhere in Western Australia, and finally, placement with a non-Aboriginal person who also may be anywhere in Western Australia. This amendment is critical to minimise the additional trauma of dislocation from family, culture and country, and will result in meaningful improvements for the outcome of Aboriginal children in the care system. It will also have really practical outcomes. In a report dated this year called Children and Youth Reported Missing from Out-of-Home Care in Australia, it's a very long title, a review of the literature and analysis of Australian police data, a report prepared for the Australian Federal Police Missing Persons Coordination Centre, provided the following insights. That children missing 10 times or more were over 9 times more likely to be in care compared to children who went missing once. Nationally, just 37% of non-care youth were repeat missing. The report found evidence that young people often went missing to return home or to return to their friends or partners, and in particular, separation from siblings was shown to cause great distress. And the loss of frequent contact with one siblings had been a reason why many children in care run away. So we can see how placing and prioritising the placement of Aboriginal children in the care system within their family networks is so important. Humans are social beings and we're hardwired for connection to those who are closest to us. This amendment recognises this fact, and it is my hope it will significantly reduce the associated trauma of dislocation from extended family, culture and community for Aboriginal children. I would also like to add my contribution today to another aspect of the bill, that of mandatory reporting. Again, I would like to talk to my personal experience as a teacher to demonstrate how critical mandatory reporting is for the protection of children and young people. Unfortunately, in my role as a teacher, I made numerous reports of suspected child abuse, child sex abuse and severe neglect under the mandatory reporting framework. While I never hesitated to make those calls, the mandatory reporting legislation removes any doubt or personal judgment about what teachers, in my case, should do if they suspect a child is being harmed. It may seem obvious that reporting child abuse shouldn't be hard. And as I said, for me, I never hesitated. But living in a small or close community, I could see the circumstances in which a teacher, for example, might consider the impacts of their decision to report and hesitate to do so. As I said, mandatory reporting removes all doubt. I commend this part of the bill which brings into the mandatory reporting requirements additional workers such as early childhood workers, ministers of religion, out-of-home care workers, school counsellors, registered psychologists and youth justice workers. Of this group of professionals, the most attention has been paid to ministers of religion, with an argument mounted by some against their inclusion on the grounds of protecting the sanctity of the confession and the protection of freedom of religion. We proudly live in a society where we uphold and protect certain freedoms, but I don't know any examples where a particular freedom is not balanced or constrained by responsibilities or the hierarchy of other rights or freedoms. It is, in my opinion, both a moral and intellectual failure to argue against the inclusion of ministers of religion on this basis. We do not accept, for example, underage marriage on the basis of religious practice, or other religious practices we outlaw because they cause harm, and nor should we ever accept there is a valid reason for protecting and harbouring known child abusers. Tackling child abuse, child sex abuse and harm is an all-of-community effort, and we each carry an obligation to do what we can. Only 38% of child victims disclose their abuse. And here is another disturbing fact I uncovered. 70% of child sex offenders have between 1 and 9 victims, and 20% have 10 to 40 victims. It beggars belief to me, having worked with children and young people, that someone, somewhere didn't have a suspicion, belief, or even a confirmed knowledge of this abuse. The onus is on us in positions of authority by virtue of our profession to provide the voice and power to those who do not. The best words I can use in support of the expansion of mandatory reporting are those of a survivor of child abuse, who in a message to Australia as part of the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse said the following: "Child sexual abuse is not a crime, just a crime against the person, but is also a crime that attacks the social fabric of the nation. Too often, those entrusted with the care of children have covered up these crimes through secrecy and intimidation to protect institutional reputation. Such practices are abhorrent to any who value dignity and compassion." I'd like to talk briefly on the gendered nature of child abuse and child sex abuse. Females are 5 times more likely to be abused than males, but we do know, so 8% of victims of child sex abuse are males. And I would like to talk a little bit about the experiences, I think, of we have an increasing recognition in our society and support for victims of child sex abuse, which is fantastic and well overdue. I can't speak, of course, to the experience of being male, but I suspect through the shared experiences of friends and colleagues of mine and people who I've known in different places who are men and who have shared with me their experience of child sex abuse or the experiences of people they have known. And I think there is still a way to go to support better the experiences of male